Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive into early Islamic history.
I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
This one's really cool. We are going to be talking about a man named Abu Hudhifa ibn Utbah.
Oh, yeah. One of the Sahaba.
Yeah. And we're going to be using a lecture from Dr. Omar Suleiman to kind of guide us through this.
Perfect.
So Abu Hudayfa is a really fascinating figure, I think, because his story is a lot about sacrifice and loyalty, but like in a very quiet way. He's not one of the like big flashy names that we always hear about.
Right. Yeah, you don't hear his name come up that often.
Right, but he was there for all the major events, and his family was incredibly influential. Like
Incredible.
they were the top of the top in Mecca.
Yeah, if you want to talk about privilege, Abu Hudhaifa was born into it.
Yeah, and he gave it all up to follow the Prophet Muhammad.
Yeah, and it's not just that he gave it up. I mean, think about what it must have been like to go against your entire family, your entire tribe.
Mhm.
Your father was Utbah ibn Rabia, who was like a leader of the Quraysh.
Yeah, I mean, this is the guy who went to the Prophet Muhammad and was like, look, I'll give you anything you want. Just stop preaching this new religion.
Right. Wealth, power, position, you name it. He even offered to make him king.
And you know what's so wild is that even Utbah, even though he was opposed to Islam, he listened to the Quran when the Prophet recited it.
And he was moved.
He came back to the Quraysh and was like, we need to take this seriously. This isn't just some random thing. This is powerful.
Exactly. It just shows you the power of the prophet's message. Even someone who is completely opposed to it could be affected by it.
And you got to wonder how that impacted Abu Hudayfa, seeing his own father struggling with this new faith.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that had to have planted some seeds in his mind.
Right, and then to make things even more complicated, Utbah was killed in battle by Hamza, the Prophet's uncle.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so now you've got this added layer of revenge and like tribal feuds going on.
Wow, that's intense.
Yeah, and this theme of family division, it plays out in Abu Hudayfa's life in other ways too.
Oh, like a...
Well, his mother, Fatima bint Safwan,
Hmm.
she embraced Islam early on, and she even migrated to Abyssinia to escape persecution.
Wow. So she was one of the very first Muslims.
Yeah, but then you have his sister, Hind bint Utbah. She was married to Abu Sufyan, who was like the arch enemy of the Muslims at that time.
Yeah, Abu Sufyan. That's a name everybody knows.
Right, and Hind, she was like right there with him, fighting against the Muslims.
So you've got mother and sister on completely opposite sides of this huge historical event.
Yeah, can you imagine those family dinners?
No, I can't. It must have been so much tension.
But through all of this, you've got Abu Hudhaifa and his wife Salah bint Suhail. They both embraced Islam early on, and they also migrated to Abyssinia twice.
Wow, twice. So that's 3 migrations in total when you count their final move to Medina with the Prophet.
Right, they gave up everything, their home, their status, their wealth, everything.
And you know, it wasn't just about giving up material things. It was also about going against the social norms of their time.
Right, like leaving your tribe's religion. That was a
Wow.
huge deal.
A huge deal. And potentially very dangerous.
Absolutely. But here's what I find so interesting about Abu Hudayfa. Even though he was going through all of this, he's not described as this like fiery revolutionary type.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. We often think of the early Muslims as being very outspoken.
Right. But Dr. Suleiman describes him as being very quiet and humble, almost a background figure.
Huh, interesting. Maybe that was his way of navigating those really complex family dynamics.
It's possible he was deeply devoted to his family, even though they were on opposite sides of this conflict.
And that brings us to the story of his adopted son, Salim.
Oh yeah, Salim's story is fascinating because it gives us this glimpse into how the social landscape of early Islam was changing.
Right. So to understand Salim's story, we need to talk about the practice of tabani, which was essentially formal adoption.
And how that was being phased out during that time.
Yeah, it was a big shift in social norms.
So Salim, he started his life as a slave, but he was freed and then adopted by Abu Hudayfa. But then with the prohibition of tabani, things got complicated.
Yeah, because it wasn't clear what Salim's status would be within the family.
And how that would affect his inheritance and his place in society.
Exactly. It was a really sensitive issue.
But the Prophet Muhammad, he made a special exception for Salim and allowed him to remain a part of Abu Hudayfa's family.
Oh, wow. So the Prophet himself intervened.
Yeah, it's a really touching story. It shows how much the Prophet cared about individuals and how he was willing to be flexible in applying the new rules of Islam.
And it also speaks volumes about Abu Hudhaifa's character.
Right. He
Yeah.
clearly valued family above social norms, and he was willing to go against the grain to protect the people he loved.
And that loyalty that's going to come into play in a big way later on, especially during the Battle of Badr.
Oh man, the Battle of Badr. That's where things get really intense for Abu Hudhaifa,
Because.
because he ends up facing his own father, his brother, and his uncle on the battlefield.
Oh, wow. So literally his family is on the opposing side.
Yeah, it's a scene that's just heartbreaking to imagine. Dr. Suleiman talks about how Abu Hudhaifa broke down in tears during the battle.
From the sheer emotional weight of it all.
Exactly. It wasn't that he was doubting his faith or anything like that. It was just the pain of seeing his family on the other side.
That must have been so difficult. And, it makes you think about the personal sacrifices that so many early Muslims had to make.
It really does. And in the midst of all this heartache, there was another longing growing within Abu Hudhaifa, a longing that would ultimately lead to his death.
A longing for.
Martyrdom shahada. He wanted to die in the path of Allah.
Oh, wow. So even amidst all that personal struggle, there was this deep desire to sacrifice even more.
Yeah, it's a complex and powerful story. And we're going to dive even deeper into it next time.
I can't wait.
Salim's life is kind of crazy when you think about it. I mean, he starts out as a slave, then he's freed, then adopted by this really prominent family, and then has to navigate all these social changes as the Muslim community grows.
And it wasn't all smooth sailing, even with the Prophet making that exception for him being a part of the family. He still had to deal with limitations because of his Mawla status.
Right, that's what I was going to ask about. What does that even mean, being a Mala?
It's kind of complicated, like the term changed over time, but basically it meant you were connected to a tribe or family, but not through blood. Usually through like being a freed slave or being adopted.
Okay, so like a sponsor almost.
Yeah, you got protection and you belonged, but there were downsides too, like inheriting stuff.
Ah, so even though Abu Hudayfa loved him, Salim couldn't just get all his wealth and status automatically.
Nope, not how it worked.
Mm.
But get this, Salim used that to his advantage.
Reading?
He became a scholar of Islamic law, and guess what his specialty was?
I don't know. Tell me.
Inheritance laws. The very system that kind of held him back, he
Man.
mastered it.
That's amazing. You know, they say knowledge is power.
And Salim used his knowledge. He even advised the caliphs, like Umar ibn al-Khattab. Think about that.
A former slave advising the leader of the Muslim empire.
Wow. Talk about social mobility.
Right? And it shows how much emphasis early Islam put on knowledge.
Not just book smarts either, right? Like applying it to real-world problems. Exactly. Salim's expertise helped shape how Islamic law actually worked during a time when things were changing so fast.
And we can't forget the role that Abu Hudhaifa played in all of this. Right? Like, he might not have been able to pass down worldly possessions, but he instilled those key values in Salim.
Totally. Faith, loyalty, and service. Those are the things that made Salim successful, not just money.
And that loyalty, it comes full circle in a way when we talk about Salim and Washi.
Oh, yeah. You know, the guy who killed both his adoptive father and the Prophet's uncle.
Yeah, talk about a heavy situation.
Yeah.
And Salim not only forgives Washi, but helps him convert to Islam. That's incredible.
It's mind-blowing, honestly. Think about the pain involved, and yet he chooses compassion.
It really makes you think about what kind of person Salim was, so strong in his faith.
For real. It shows the transformative power of Islam, right? Letting go of a grudge like that. It's not human nature.
It's almost superhuman, right? And it reminds us that early Islam wasn't all about fighting and conquest. There's this deep desire for peace and unity.
Absolutely. Forgiveness was key to building a strong community, especially after all that conflict.
So Salim goes from adopted son to scholar to basically embodying forgiveness.
Yeah.
What a life. What a story.
And what lessons can we learn from that, right? Like, here's a guy who faced so much hardship, but he thrived. He didn't let his past define him.
It gives you hope, right? Like, no matter what you're going through, you can still make a positive impact.
Totally. And you know what? There's one more thing about Salim's story that we haven't touched on yet.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Remember how we were talking about Abu Hudayfa's kunya and how it was a bit of a mystery?
Yeah, father of Hudhaifa. But he didn't seem to have a son with that name. At least not one we know of.
What if I told you that mystery might be the key to a hidden chapter in Abu Hudayfa's life?
Okay, now you're really making me curious.
Okay.
Tell me more.
What if there's a reason for that missing son? Like maybe there was a Hudayfa?
Well, hold on. So you're saying Abu Hudhaifa had a secret son?
It's a theory, but Dr. Suleiman brings it up, and it's fascinating.
I'm hooked already. Tell me everything.
So picture this. This Hudhifa, he's raised away from his father. Maybe for safety reasons. Those were dangerous times, right?
Right. Makes sense. You wouldn't want your kid caught up in all that if you could help it.
Exactly. So he grows up away from the spotlight, and he becomes something really special.
Okay, spill it. What does he become?
A Hafiz. a memorizer of the Quran. He dedicates his life to preserving the Prophet's words.
No way. So Abu Hudhifa's son might have been one of the people responsible for making sure the Quran stayed safe and accurate.
Think about the implications. One son shapes Islamic law, the other safeguards the Quran. It's like Abu Hudhaifa's legacy is woven into the very fabric of Islam.
That's incredible. It makes you think about legacy in a different way, right? Like, it's not just about money or fame. It's about the impact you have on the world.
Absolutely. And it brings up this whole other side of early Islamic history, the people who worked behind the scenes to preserve knowledge.
The scribes, the memorizers. We
Yeah.
don't always hear about them, but they were crucial.
Can you imagine the dedication it took to memorize the entire Quran and then to make sure every word was copied down perfectly?
It's mind-blowing.
Right.
And it makes you wonder about Hudhaifa's life. Like, was he recognized for his role, or was it a secret?
That's the thing. We don't really know much about him. The historical record is pretty quiet.
Kind of makes it even more intriguing, though, right? Like this hidden figure who played such an important role.
Definitely. It reminds us that history is full of untold stories, and that even the smallest actions can have huge ripple effects.
Well, Abu Hudhaifa's story definitely isn't small. It's full of sacrifice, loyalty, family drama, and maybe even a secret son who helped preserve the Quran.
It's a story that makes you think about your own life, right? Like, what kind of impact do you want to have on the world?
It's a question we should all be asking ourselves.
Mm.
I think Abu Hudhaifa and his sons, they teach us that even in the midst of chaos and change, we can still make a difference.
And that our actions can echo through generations long after we're gone.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's all take a moment to appreciate the quiet heroes in our own lives.
The people who inspire us to be better, to do more, to leave the world a little brighter than we found it.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep searching for those hidden stories that connect us all.